to prayer, which is another very on-the-ground thing, we might say, but also really important. It was giving in secret, and today it's almost in a sense secret prayer, a private prayer. One of the reasons that I chose the Gospel of Matthew to preach through was that while it is filled with much of glorious truth and doctrine and things that are helpful and to understand, it is also a gospel that has much of these basic things and important things and things we need to be reminded of and encouraged in to walk faithfully. And this of private prayer is something that is very important and is something that is an everyday occurrence to us and something we need to consider. We speak frequently of the means of grace that God gives us, and prayer is one of those things, that it is a means of grace, that God uses it to bring His grace to us and to sanctify us and to encourage us. And so we need to think about prayer and think about it well, because as the outline is, as we'll start with, is that there is actually a way that an approach to prayer that we need to understand, but there is also another side to know that there are approaches to prayer that are wrong and that would even be sinful. And to some that might sound very strange, but that's actually what Jesus is addressing in both of these things in this text. So the outline is that we'll look at some sins in prayer. Secondly, the God who hears and answers prayer. And third, we'll look at blessings of prayer. So first, the sins in prayer. Now, as we said, that prayer is a great gift of God. It is one of His means of grace, that He gives us the Word, gives us prayer, and the sacraments as a special means of grace to us. And yet prayer is something that is often neglected, and it's often abused. And that can be odd to us if we think about it, that someone can be maybe neglectful in prayer seems easy enough to understand, but to think that prayer could be abused and used wrongly might seem strange to us. In other words, you can sin and err in your prayers in private prayer. That has to sound a little odd. We need guidance because we are not free just to pray however we might feel. We need direction. And what's going to happen is that in this section, starting in verse 5 and beginning next week, we'll begin to see and understand prayer and guidance that Jesus gives us throughout prayer. That again, this is not that every word that is to be said and form is going to be here, but it's a template, it's a guide, it's direction. And we're going to look at that slowly, which next week we'll cover Our Father in Heaven. But before we get there, we talk about this particular means of private prayer. And he tells us that there are two sins that can come out in private prayer that we need to understand. First is look at verse 5. When you pray, you must not be like the hypocrites, for they love to stand and pray in the synagogues and at the street corners, that they may be seen by others. Truly I say to you, they have received their reward. The first of these two sins that he tells us is that we are not to be like actors in prayer. We are not to be like the hypocrites, who stand and pray in synagogues, which is church worship we could think of, and at the street corners of busy places, because they want to be seen by others. We've covered that. This is what Jesus is saying, is that to avoid first being an actor in a prayer, being a hypocrite, one who puts on a mask or who plays a part as if they were someone else, fooling not only others but also themselves, pretending to be something that you are not. This is hypocrisy. Now, how would they do this? Well, they would go to the busy places and the places where people might gather that day, the street corners and places of intersection, but also they would go, we might think of what that could be, a busy place, a place filled with people, and also they would go to the synagogues, or they would go to church worship services, or we might think they would go to Bible studies or something where people were gathered and prayer would be done and could be conducted in public in front of other people. And Jesus is saying that what is happening here is that it's being done to make a religious show. Now, what would they do? They would come to these places in order to be seen by others and to want them to praise them, and that they would have them in that moment think this is a godly person. They wanted to show their own righteousness in and through their prayer in the same way that we would think about their giving and helping of other people. They would want others to see their righteousness and then receive applause from them. Their goal in this is that they wanted others to think of them how they wanted to be thought of. They wanted people to think, you are a godly person. I want them to think I'm godly. I want them to think that I'm humble. I want them to think I'm sincere. I want them to think I'm knowledgeable, and they would use prayer as a means of accomplishing that, and would pray in such a way that they would hope that they would get their reward of other people